Hey guys, this is webinar number 33. So this is about 9 to 4 handed play at 180 man final tables. Last webinar we looked at 10 to 18 handed stuff, and this is going to focus on 9 to 4 handed. So the main thing we want to look at for each thing we're going to discuss is how can I use this in game? So how can we use the things that we're going to discuss and immediately use them to affect your results? So this is one of the very first hands, 9-handed. A guy shoves. It folds around to you on the button. What are your thoughts? Get a shove, still have a goodish stack. Well, when you say shove, what's your reasoning behind shove? You should remember, as we discussed in previous things, reasons, or the thinking, lead to your decisions, which then leads to your results. The decision itself is never the most important thing. It's the thinking that leads you to the decisions, because that is what occurs more often than the actual decision itself. I can't fold if I call. Oh, I see. Okay. This is not the first hand of the final table. It is the 1, 2, 3, the third. So essentially the first hand, but not necessarily. Okay, so your reason is king, queen suited is good versus range. Okay. What's his range? Ooh. Friendly rebuttal. Okay, HUD can influence your decision. Now, if we backtrack, you've actually had this guy at the table, so you might have some HUD in game. And is there feedback? Or is it just on my end? If it's just me, I don't care. Sometimes you get to a final table and we've never had a hand versus this guy before. Happens a lot. Okay, let's focus on how you can use this in game. Okay, first off, if you are thinking about your opponent's range, how should you think about it? So you're saying, I'm ahead of his range. What's his range? Everybody write in what you think this guy's range is. Every single person here. If you had to estimate his range, guess his range. So Pouillon, just write out a range. Well, first of all, you guys did something good. We kind of mentioned this before a long time ago. Do not think in percentages. None of you said that. I ask this a lot in coaching sessions, and I get different responses. I ask someone, what do you think someone's range is here? And people say 30%. That does nothing. It's always important to think of real hands. So good. Step one, you guys all got. No one said a percentage shoving range. You said real hands. Notice, look back at your responses. You gave actual cards instead of percentages. That's a good thing, okay? But now, even if you know this information, so let's, my mouse happens to be highlighting this right now. Let's pretend this is his range here. Any pair, any ace, king 10, all that kind of stuff. What should you call with if he shoves that range? How do you know? How is it that all of you who have played thousands and thousands of games have come up with such different ranges here? How is that possible? That all of you guys, you've all had similar types of coaching and you've been exposed to the same information. How is it that none of you are agreeing with each other? Like, is that weird? One guy's saying king deuce suited. The other guy's saying, oh, random's never shoving king deuce here, I think, and not 7-8 suited as well. Because notice what you're doing. We'll get to this in a second. You guys are trying to pick up imperfect information. Okay? Perfect information, by definition, is stuff that you know. For instance, he's shoving 14,278. That's perfect information. Imperfect information is what this guy's shoving range is. How do you know what he's shoving? And how do all of you guys who have all types of experience, you've been around, you've seen a lot of stuff, and none of you have the same answer? I guess Puyon agrees with what Sanders said. That's the only one, okay? But basically, this is all imperfect information. We have to realize we don't know what he has, okay? Yes, exactly. Perfect information is when you know. These are all assumptions, okay? So how can we use this in game? Forget about his shoving range. If you are thinking about your opponent's range, step one was don't think in percentages, okay? Step two was think in real hands. You've done that now. But step three is ignore all that, okay? Whenever you're calling, you have a certain amount of equity in a hand, okay? When you have this amount of equity, how is it derived? How do you get this equity? So let's just say versus whatever this guy's range, this fictitious range, you happen to be a 60% favorite. Let's just pretend. How is that 60% formed? Why are you 60% versus this guy's fake range? How do you become 60%? Yeah, and this is really important because guess what? That's perfect information. You know your position and you know your stack size. You don't know his shoving range. If you're 60% versus range, how are you 60%? What comprises that? That is perfect information. If you call, you will go to showdown. That's true. People complain about running bad all the time. They're like, I never win races. But then they go call all the time with pocket twos. It's like, hey, if you don't want to be in a race, full pocket twos. And then you'll never complain about losing again with pocket twos. This is a good point. Anyway, if you are 60% in a spot, this is really important. Remember this. The bulk of your equity in any given hand comes from the hands you dominate most. Is it my echo? Because I hear my own voice. Let me back up. Let me see if I can do something. Test. I am wearing headphones. What about now? Is that any better? Headphones. I pulled my headphones out for that. The bulk of your equity in any given hand comes from the hands you dominate most, which means if we scroll back up to your ranges here, where are we? And look at the hands that you're saying he shoves. King deuce suited. Jack 10 suited. Twos, ace X. Who knows? Does he shove those? Maybe. In this hand, I'm asking myself, does he shove King Jack? King 10. Queen Jack. Queen 10. King 9. Because these questions are easier to answer than what's his shoving range. Because these are simpler questions. What's his shoving range? I have no idea. That's a very open-ended question. But if I ask you, is his phone seriously ringing? No, it was the solicitor. Does he shove King Jack? Answer that question, everybody. Yes or no, does he shove King Jack? It's true. You still don't know for sure. It's at least a lot more easier to answer than what's his shoving range. Because now we have a yes or a no question instead of an open-ended question. Anyway, how to use this in game. The more hands you think he shoves that you dominate, the better your call is. Okay? But for the most part, think more about perfect information, which we'll get into next. Think about your stack size. Think about your position. Know that if you fold, you essentially have 7 hands until the blinds hit you. Maybe a little less if someone busts out. To shove or not to shove, I don't know. I have no idea. You have to make sure that your thinking is right. So if I thought this guy was shoving King Jack, King 10, King 9, maybe our stats suggest that he's potentially wide. That would help. But I don't care, does this guy shove Jack 5 of diamonds? Because if I call and he has Jack 5 diamonds, I'm not very happy. Maybe you guys would be happy. If you're happy, then it's a call. I'm worried about the hands that I directly dominate. Let's see what he does. Yay! Or no. Could we have avoided this completely by just folding? Personally, I'd probably fold here more often than call, but sometimes call. But this is the most important thing. Risk versus reward. We said in the beginning, if you are thinking about your opponent's range. Okay, so let's block this off really quick. This is if you're thinking about your opponent's range. Okay? The most important thing is the perfect information. We're analyzing risk. What I want is low risk. That's what I want. So here's what you can use in game. The less people behind you, the better. Right? Because it's less likely you'll be overcalled, or you'll run into a better hand. Okay? The smaller the shover's stack, the better, because then you risk less. If this was 9,000, it would be much better because you're risking less. The shorter the guys behind you are, the better, because less risk. Here, versus the 2 guys behind you, and no one even said this at all, you go busto. What if both of these guys behind you had 10K? Becomes much better. Does what really matter? Which part? Yes, it does. Because if one of these guys has a hand behind you, think about it like this. If the guys behind you have 1 chip or 50,000 chips, they still have the exact same probability of being dealt a good hand. Like if they have aces behind you, it happens no matter what the size of their stack is. But if they cover you, you're out. If they have 9K behind you, then you're not risking your entire stack. So the risk is lowered. If both of them have 9K, for instance, your maximum risk in this hand is 14,278. If you shove and you're covered by even one of these guys, your maximum risk is 25,686. You would have less equity in the pot if they call wider because they're that short. So that is one thing to think about, is how short are they? If they were short enough to the point where they were always going to call, then it would be worse to call. So you're onto something here. It's like, let's say someone has 100 chips. It would be really good to call because you barely lose anything to them. If they had 6,000 chips with 3,000 posted in the big blind, that would be bad to call here. So maybe we should put a little asterisk.
You're gonna see that later on.
Unless they won't fold, and that damages you. So good point you bring up. So this guy had 6K posted and 3K behind, and he's never folding. It's bad because you're right, you have less equity in the pot. And this guy has 18,000. You're risking less, and it's still likely that that guy will fold with that stack size. I'm really glad you said this. So basically, there's kind of a fine point. Like if they're super short, it's easy call. If they get short where it can damage you, but they're going to call 100% of the time because they think they're so short, then it's bad. Then the bigger they get, as long as they're still kind of short, it's good. And then if they're super big like this, you have full risk. Okay, that could be confusing. How to use this in game. Every time you have a spot, and we'll just use ISOing for this example, analyze the risk. That's it. Lower the risk, the better the shove. Right? You could have the exact same pot odds if this guy shoved under the gun and you were sitting right here and you still had king, queen of clubs. Except now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people behind you instead of 2 people behind you. Higher risk ISO shove. We should definitely fold. So to sum this up in a nutshell, analyze risk. The lower it is, the better this ISO shove is. So we'll sum it up. Lower risk equals better ISO shove. That's it. Yeah. And then, of course, good luck doing that in the moment. So really it just comes from feel, where it's like, if you call here and you lose, let's see actually what happened to him. He wins, yay. But then what would happen? Look what happens to his stack. It would drop down to 10K. So now you're going to have much worse spots with a 10K stack than you would with a 25K stack, so it affects your future EV. Okay. Now let's move on to the imperfect information, perfect information stuff. This is hand 66. So Marco, this can apply in 18s as well. Here we go. It folds around you. What do you do? Everybody give an answer. Mm-hmm. Question is, what would you do? Good question, Sander. Right now, you don't know. So we got a hate the shove. We got a Puyon saying, keep it simple, stupid, shove. Marco says it depends. Sanders says rather limp, stab, or raise fold. Okay, now I have another hand for you. Very next to orbit, literally the exact same stack size. You still have, to the chip, exact same stack size. Kiss applies to the shover too. A lot of guys just shove to keep it simple. What do you do now? You could. You could take into consideration that you folded. Just a question. What do you do here? Yes. Good question. You did end up folding before. If that helps you at all. And so, Marco, this is in 18-man, same kind of idea here. It would just be like, 10 big blind shove, whatever. It might be a little different 18-man since people might be more timid at this point in a 180-man versus four-handed in an 18-man. So, Puyan, you shove more now because you folded last time. Well, just because you know you folded doesn't mean that this guy knows you folded. If someone doesn't see something or if they don't remember it, then it doesn't exist. So just because you know doesn't mean that it happened. This is really interesting because you literally look to the chip. You have the same exact stack. 53842. 53842. Under the gun, different stack sizes around. The big blind has a slightly different stack. So here's my next question. What is the big blind's calling range here? What is the big blind's calling range here? How about if I said this? A, the same, B, not the same. What would you say, A or B? For both of these hands, would you say A, the same range in both hands he calls with, or B, not the same? Why'd you say B? Notice how, like, the general answer we're getting is depends, depends, depends. So here you go. Here's your imperfect information. What's he going to call with? And guess what? Even if it is the same range, okay? First of all, if it's not the same range, then how would we know what the range is? How about for you guys who said A, the same range? What's his range? And now we're back to what we talked about 15 minutes ago. We have no idea what his range is. We know no information about that guy. Even if you said A or B, it's still imperfect information. How do you know? Okay. So here's some statistics I'm going to give you, and tell me if I can change your mind at all. Okay. And this is something I looked up earlier. Nash says you can shove 8-6 offsuit for exactly 7 big blinds. 7.0, so exactly 7 big blinds with 8-6 offsuit. And it's unexploitable. Nash says you can shove 20 plus big blinds with 5-4 suited. Does that change your mind about either of these hands? So we get a bit, we get an LOL, we get a nope. Sanders says still does the same. He's not giving in to peer pressure. Cleon says shoving. Okay. It's very interesting. Everybody's still divided. So earlier during this coaching session, I asked Screech. I asked Screech, who did really, really good. He had a really good month last month. And I asked him, I said, what do you think this guy's calling range is? And of course, we don't know what it is, but he gave a guess. So we assumed a calling range just for fun. He's like, I think he'll call wide. So we just gave a fake calling range, and we put this in Poker Stove. So basically what we did was we gave him any pair, any ace, all Broadway cards, and then a random queen 9. Okay. If Nash says you can shove 8-6 for only 7, but you can shove 20 big blinds plus with 5-4 clubs, what would you think 8-6 offsuit versus that range? What would you think that equals, your percentage edge? And same with 5-4 suited versus that range. I already know the answer to this because we looked it up. So this one, Nash says 7 big blinds. This one, Nash says 20 big blinds. What's your percentage versus this range? Okay, good guess. 35 and 40. Anybody else? Keep in mind that 5-4 clubs, Nash is saying 3 times. You can shove 3 times as many big blinds with 5-4 clubs than 8-6. Anybody else have a guess? We got a 35 and a 40. Throw some numbers out. Take a guess. $33 and a 38. So both of you have a 5% gap. Anybody else? Okay, so you want to go 42. You want to go 35, 42. Okay. And so gap must be huge. Okay, so take a guess. Take a guess. I don't expect you to be right. He says it's the same. How could it be the same if one you can shove 7 and the other one you can shove 20 plus? I'll give you a hint. This is the exact edge for this hand. What's the edge for this? He says it's the same. So Sander thinks 42. Come on, now that you know this is 35.1, what's the other one? Take a guess. Come on, everybody. 42.2. How about this? I will give you two numbers. Third number is a 5. Second number is a 7. Lingo? that. Thoughts, opinions, comments. Suited connectors are the nuts, which leads people to shove one over the other sometimes. It kind of makes sense. 8-6 says 7 big blinds according to Nash. Other one is 47. Well, this, Puyon, in this example, we're assuming the same range for both situations. So, like, we keep the range at a constant, and then we can compare the two. And you could do this against various ranges, too, but you'd probably come up with the same type of pattern, unless the range gets super duper tight. Then you would just be screwed. Now I want to share something with you. After I read what logically, he says, now that I see it, I'm so glad you said this. No hands dominate you suited adds 2%, connected adds 4%, and suited connected well adds 12.4% total. I'm so glad you say that because I lied to you. That's the edge. Oh, this is fun. Good job. Good job. That is the edge. And this is why I'm sharing this with you guys. Because what this does is it basically debunk, which is one of my favorite words, it debunks the entire Nash equilibrium strategy. Like, really? Nash says shove this with 7 and shove this with 20, but they only have a 2.4% difference between the two hands? That's literally something you would never, ever, ever notice that unless you pulled out a calculator. You don't know what the difference is. You can never sense the physical difference between 35.1 and 37.5. Oh, boom. Oh, nice. Good job. But isn't the Nash range, isn't that the same, right? Because this is with the same exact stack size? Or no? Ooh, I think you got a good point there, sir. Because I know what the Nash chart they're saying, if the opponent calls perfect, but it could be different depending on what stack size you have. Good rebuttal, sir. Yeah. strangely enough, the goofiest answer of all was the closest answer to the to the real one. What I totally agree with what you're saying, Sandra, about how different a slightly different calling range probably, especially depending on what stack you're shoving it from. But what I really think is so goofy about all this is that you would expect, just from this, the illusion of it, right? You can shove almost 3 times as many big blinds. Yet, that's the only difference. So anyway, what to do in this hand? Well, we need more information. Most of the time you have no information when you're playing this hand, and you have to trust yourself. You're shit out of luck. You can't rely on anything else. So you just have to trust your gut. If you want to shove, shove. If you want to limp, stab, limp. Okay? But the biggest thing would be make sure that you don't think there's some plays that are wrong. Like you're not allowed to limp here, or you're not allowed to fold, or you're not allowed to shove, or something like that. Bingo. We're 50 hands into the final table. There's no excuse not to know anything here. Okay? We should know something. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back in time and we're going to watch this guy, okay, from the beginning of the final table. So since we're just focusing on 9 to 4 handed here, you should be doing this at all final tables, even if it's the final table of an 18-man. And that's harder because there's more of those going at once. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go backwards. We're going to start over from the beginning. When does it start? Here we go. 2 players behind you are probably the closest ones. For the most part, probably the guy next to you is the most important at all times because you're going to have the most BVB stuff versus him. Then this guy would be the next important, just like you said, Sander. And also just watching people who stick out from the crowd. Okay, so I call these personality reads. We've seen a million times. You could also think of them as character reads. How can you use this in game? Anytime. So we'll write this down. We'll write it right here in caps. Anytime you are at a final table, think of it as a story. And I know I've said this before. There are 8 characters in this story with you. Find out who is who. So like in real life, you meet someone and you go, oh, that guy's a funny guy. Then you meet another guy and you go, ooh, that guy's a shy guy. Or you meet a girl and you go, oh, that's the pretty girl, or whatever, right? So when you know those basic things about their personalities, you can make assumptions about them. Hey, that funny guy, probably going to tell the joke pretty soon, right? Hey, that cute girl, I don't know. Maybe you want to go on a date with her. I don't know, whatever, right? But you can start imagining things that might happen with those people, right? The shy guy, you can expect him not to talk so much, right? Now we need to do the same thing here. The most basic elements that you can look at. Who is active? Who is not active? Who is super aggressive? Like, who is aggro? Who is passive? Things like that. Very, very basic things, but we should be doing this at all final tables. So this is how you can actually use this in game. So we are going to focus just on this guy now. Okay? And then we're going to revisit those 2 hands. Okay? So what I've done here is I've laid out 2 groups of categories. Okay? Since we were wondering about shoving the 8-6 and the 5-4, we would want to think about things that show if he's tight or loose in terms of calling. Okay? And then this is just if he's aggro, average, or passive overall. Anytime we see something that recommends, or sorry, that suggests one of these traits, we will just put a plus sign next to it. Okay? You can focus on your own image too, but I want to mostly focus on other people because they're more important than me. Okay? So here's the first hand. We're just going to watch this guy. Very first hand of the final table. 5-4 offsuit. Okay? Now, in terms of calling, does that suggest a wide caller, an average caller, or a tight caller? Okay, we get a wide, we get an average. Why?
one thing we can tell. Pot odds? So is this wide or average? I don't know. Can we say it's somewhere in between? Can we say, like, can we create a new category here? Can we say above average? Somewhere in there. And you don't have to have just these categories. You can think of this however you want. That's true. This is really true. Let's put a negative sign there for not tight. That's a really good read. The opposite of the read you were trying to get, right? Good. Okay, let's move on. Here's our hand, if you recall from earlier. Okay, and now basically, I'm going to flip through and just watch his stack, and if nothing happens to it, we can assume he folded. Okay, so look, he's folded 4 hands in a row, 5 hands in a row. What? No, no, no. He shoves this one. Oh! You're very right. You are very, very right. Okay, yeah, thanks, man. Good point. Because these, like, okay, maybe he just needed a hand. Okay, first act spot. Okay, he folded. He folds again. He folds again. He shoves this one. We've seen him shove 1 time now. So right away, Puyan's thinking not aggro based on what we've seen. Yeah, it's a 13 big blind shove. Yeah. Okay. He does this. That's fine. I told him maybe raise is better, but whatever. Doesn't matter. We're focusing on the Aduku, whatever his name is. So he folds. Button spot. He raises. Okay. Just from that, we've seen nothing. Does that tell us anything? Aggro, average, passive. Does that tell us anything? Not tight. How do you know? Maybe he had aces. You don't know what he had. Yeah, this is a good point. It looked like he typed that in. Hotkey bets usually don't do that. They do. The numbers sometimes get rounded up if it comes to a decimal. He opens again. He gets called. Here's the flop. He bets. He gets called. He checks the turn. He folds to a small bet. What does that tell us? What did you notice him do in this hand? Same number. That's true. He doesn't type in the same number twice. It's possible. Some guys do. I've seen it in coaching sessions. See betting size. The most important thing from this hand to take. C-betted. That's like a double plural. He C-bet and he folded. Would an aggro, average, or passive person C-bet and fold? Okay. Could be average. It could be aggro too. It could be this. It could be either of the two. It's definitely not passive. It's not passive, so we'll put a negative sign. Okay? And all this stuff, this is what I'm doing in my head as I play. I'm just adding up all the things that he does to see if he's passive or aggressive or whatever. Okay? Now let's move on. So he folds. He shoves. He gets called. He has 4s. Does that tell us anything? Okay. So what we could do, like one thing, we don't know what it means, so we could either put pluses for average, above average, and average and aggro, or passive maybe too. He's just not tight. So let's maybe if we did something here, if we added a thing that said tight, we'll put a negative for it. He sucks out. Okay, he folds. He folds. Does that tell us anything about him? Maybe he just had 3 deuce. If anything, maybe it tells us he's not psycho. Yeah. It is the first time we've done something versus him. That is true. See, like here, see how that guy had huge pot odds and he folded? That guy wouldn't fold. We've seen him call with 5-4 for more chips. So, like, if we were keeping track of this guy, he'd be a tight caller because he folded to 2 big blinds. So what that would tell me is raise that guy's big blind more in the future. Okay. He raises with Jack 5, not important. Here we go. Okay. Guy folds again. He min raises. What? That's different. Easy fold. Yeah. Yes. Very good. Very good. Because that's what we're working with here. Is we're trying to build up to those 2 hands. It does. Yeah. If this guy's that tight, shoving the other hands is worse. We should attack that guy instead. Of course, there's a lot of people who never notice this stuff while they play, and they just resort to easy Nash shoves, easy single with shoves without paying attention to any information. Okay, look, now he called. Same exact situation, but he had something, I guess. Okay, that guy folds again. Okay, this guy shoves. 13 big blinds. Again. Yeah, I remember that. Okay, he folds. He folds. Hero gets a walk. Fold. He folds. Hero raises. He reshoves. He does know effective stacks, which on the next hand you'll see that for sure. He shoves effective stack size. Would that be aggro, average, passive, tight? Okay. Well, it's definitely not passive, that's for sure. It's definitely not tight. Average or aggro? Maybe it could be either one. I don't know. Both? You could put a plus for both. Okay. Hero makes a great fold here. And here we are. We are back. So now we have this information now. Okay, look. He's not tight. He's not passive. He's probably he's like in between average and aggro from what we've seen, right? Let's call it above average aggression. So maybe we could say aggression above average, because maybe it's in between average and aggro, above average. Okay. Now we look at the calling stuff. We know he's not tight and he is possibly above average. Potential wide caller. Not necessarily a wide caller, but potentially. Now, how does this change your mind now? Good point. I'll address this in a second. You have no HUD. Didn't you hear PokerStars might outlaw it? What are you going to do without HUD now? You have to rely on observation. Seriously, PokerStars might get rid of it. Then what are you going to do? Pay attention? Oh man, paying attention sucks. So now you're dealing with a potential wide caller, but you don't know for sure, and someone who has above average aggression. Okay, now let's go and continue. He walks blind versus blind. He raises to 15K. He gets 3-bet. He folds. Does that tell you anything? Good. What does this tell you? Is that someone who's aggro or average? Good. Very good. So he's coming out more aggressive now. 3x and a fold. My 3x button raise where he's bluffing. That's aggressive. Okay. Now we move on to here. Yeah, I think it's important too. Now we get to here. So based on everything I've seen from him, he's a potential wide caller. Potential. We don't know for sure, but potential. And above average aggression. If I raise, I don't want to give an above average aggressive player who potentially may call me wide the chance to reshove on me. I do not want to do that. I will limp here because it stops him from shoving on me. Reshoving on me. He still could shove on me if I limp, but I only lose 2,500. I do not lose 7,500 if I min raise. I lose 3 times less. Okay. And if he's a potential wide caller, I don't want to shove just because Nash says I can. Because what's the difference between 37.5 and 35.1? That's like nothing. Okay? I would limp here. So we can see what Hero did. We'll revisit these. I would limp here too, by the way. So he folds. He shoves. A potential wide caller makes raise better. True, maybe he flats the raise. But then the pot is a little bigger than I'd like, but it's not bad. You do have more fold equity on the flop, that's true, because the pot is bigger. Although a lot of that folding equity does come from chips that you've now put into the pot and you have to win back. But a raise would still be not horrible. Not horrible at all. Okay, so now that we've seen this, basically what I'm trying to get at here is when you know something about the characters in the story, when you know who is who, you may be able to play hands differently. Now I want to share with you the final hand. This one. Sorry, not this one, sorry. That was all dramatic for nothing. Okay, so we fold this, he folds. This is the hand. No, king 4, I want king 4. Or maybe this is it. No, it's not. He raises a button, it's the next orbit. Fold. Folds. Folds. Here's your climax. Hero folds. Button raises. Small blind calls. Big blind folds. Here's the flop. Hey, Puyon, remember? Remember what you said earlier about the percentage of a c-bet? You said his c-betting size was small. Remember, he bet like 8,700 and 20,000. This is like the same kind of percentage. Remember what he did last time when he c-bet? He c-bet and gave up. Right? Here's what happens. Villain raises, well, they're both villains. Villain number 2 raises to 30. What do you think this Aduku guy is going to do now from what you've seen him do throughout the game? Well, we know, let's think of it, who he is. He is above average aggression, and he's a potential wide caller. That's all we know. But remember, that was just from 5-4 offsuit, which could have just been pot odds.
Okay. We don't know what he's going to do. Trick question. We don't know. Because it depends. This is imperfect information. You're about to get some perfect information, though. He calls. Turn is a bad card. He shoves 30. I'm going to give you a spoiler here. A Dooku is going to call. I want you to guess what he has. Come on, everybody. We get an ace-jack. Come on, Puyon. Throw something out there. So remember, he raised the button. He c-bet, called the raise, and now he's going to call the turn all in. How can you be away from keyboard if you're typing on your keyboard? Weird. Okay. Come on, give me a couple more guesses. Even if you've already guessed already, give me another hand. None of you are right so far. It's not any of those. It's not King Jack, not Ace Jack, not King 9. Good guesses. Here's the answer. But that's a pair. Ace Jack is a pair. The most important thing that this guy did on this hand, the most telling piece of evidence, is this. He called here with Ace 4. Ace 4 and Ace Jack are not the same, really, because here he has a pair. That would be him calling here with a pair. He doesn't have a pair. Well, oh, in terms of equity, right. In terms of equity, it's like, yeah, they're both crap. Agree with that. In terms of this guy, because remember, what we're trying to get out of this is he a wide caller, average caller? I mean, sorry, above average, average, or tight? To me, this means like really wide. Because at least if he calls here with Ace Jack, even though maybe it's the same poor equity against a king, he may think he just has the best hand if he's calling with Ace Jack. Here he is calling with Ace High against a check raise to 30k. He has a backdoor diamond draw. Yeah, maybe in his head he's like, oh, I have something. I have a backdoor gut shot in the back. But this is loose. This is not tight. This is not average. This is not just above average. This is just weird. This is just really wide, right? This is the importance of imperfect versus perfect information. Now you have perfect information on this guy that suggests that he's just stupid, right? He called. What semi-bluff, what kind of semi-bluff is that where you just call? All of that with Ace High. Here, if any, like he calls here with a diamond, like this is a better call than his flop call. Like at least here he has a flush. Like here he's literally just calling with Ace High. That is really bad. So now, this is why imperfect and perfect information are so important. Sometimes there's perfect information, you're just never going to find it out. Because we went the entire game not knowing what this guy's capable of. And all of a sudden, after the two important hands with 5-4 and 8-6, we find this out about him, that he's just stupid. Now he's gone. Which is very fitting for the webinar too, because we're only allowed to go to four-handed. But now if I can rewind really quick to these hands, now you're blind versus a guy who's capable of c-betting and calling a raise with Ace High in a huge pot on the flop. I do not want to shove 8-6 into that type of player, because that's the guy who's just going to look down at King 8 and not even think about it and call you.
When you're at a final table, see if you can spot things that tell. Okay. No. You can disagree. I don't care. We're talking about this is the same guy. He has the same type of personality. Okay. How do you know? Right? It's the same thing, but how do I know he's going to call with king eight? I'm making I would like to say, an educated assumption. I can't say it's 100% for sure. But I'm totally with Sander on this. Like, okay, will he call you a king eight? Okay, let's agree. How do we know, right? But at least now, from what we've seen, and team viewer cut out, of course. I'll get it back. From what we've seen, it seems very likely that he can do that. But even if he's not, just limp here, and we never have to even get called ever. We will never get our all-in called if we limp. Well, flatting and rejamming, yes, they are different things, but we're talking about this is a guy who has the personality traits where potentially he is a hugely wide caller, right? It's like how in the beginning we said, get to know the people you're around. Well, how do you know that? How do you know that it's not for all-ins? It doesn't, but think about this. Experience right now, it doesn't matter. It's just this guy. This guy is the only person that matters. So maybe we can find him on the tables, and we can ask him, seriously, if you ever see him, send him a message and tell him to email you or something. Well, we haven't seen him call an all-in wide, but you're never going to have that exact circumstance. You're never always going to have exactly the matching circumstances in a game. You can only make educated assumptions based on personality traits. Like we said in the beginning, if a guy's funny, we can assume he's going to tell jokes. If a guy's shy, we can assume that he's probably going to be shy and not talk so much. Yeah, exactly. It's a huge tell. It doesn't mean 100% accurately that he's always calling super wide here. But remember, the whole point of this exercise was to say, estimate whether this guy's wide, above average, average, or tight. And the ace-4 just gives us a big reason to assume that it's more likely he's a wide caller than any of these. Yeah, even if he doesn't call in here, you know what, maybe, because everybody's different. Maybe he doesn't call all in wides and he only calls that flop wide. Maybe he was just convinced he had the best hand. It's the personality trait. It's true. But you know what? This isn't his tournament life here. He has more than you. But you're right, it's different for different people. And that's the whole thing with imperfect information. You just have to make really, really strong educated guesses instead of just having no information at all and just relying on stupid defaults that like Nash says or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's educated at least. It's not blind. We don't know if he always will call. That's for sure. For sure. But we definitely know, like, this is not normal. This is different than this is maybe different than what you're thinking of. Because this is based off of observation. If you're thinking of educated guesses in the sense that, like, okay, based on experience, like, I practice all these things, I'm making an educated guess. Then this would be, if we're defining that as an educated guess, then this would be like the next level. This is like observation and execution of thought, whatever you want to call it. The point is, we're seeing something that's out of place here, and we can recognize what that may mean. But you know what? In this particular game, it made literally no difference because it was too late. we're like, oh my god, we see this cool thing about that guy, and then he's gone. That's it. We're probably not going to ever come across that guy again in an important final table situation. So, sucks for us, I guess. Because even though we saw something that's really, really helpful, we can never execute it. Well, we don't know, like, this is rare. Like, this is just bad wide. Now, of course, if you see something like that, just make a note, whether it's in your head or in your actual notepad or whatever, and just say, this guy's crazy. Very true. That sums it up. You just never want to make the mistake of shoving these just because, like, oh, this is standard, I shove. You want to shove because it's the best play. You never want to shove just because it's normal. Because there's tons of opportunities, or what's the word I'm thinking of? Tons of different plays that you can use here. And then add to that any outstanding information from evidence. Because it's the difference, like we talk about circumstantial evidence versus physical evidence, and my team viewer is being stupid. So anyway, I think that's good. It kind of cut out at the right time anyway. Glad to hear your thoughts, Puyan. Really good. Any questions about anything at all? How to actually use this in game? Watch the people who are around you and see if you can notice anything that sticks out. Just like how you know, and you should be aware of this stuff even if you're not paying like perfect attention. Because I'm sure you've been in a situation where like you walk inside somewhere and you're like, something's missing or like something's wrong. Like you just naturally pick up on that. And it turns out that like the furniture was rearranged or a picture's not on the wall. Like, have you ever seen those puzzles where they say like, what's wrong with this picture or whatever, and you have to like figure out like the weird thing in it? Kind of like that when you're playing. Just notice the things that stick out and don't belong and see if that can add anything to your game.